Sorry. Good afternoon. Welcome to this event looking at a just transition for sustainability and health with respect to livestock production systems. My name is Namkolo Kovic. I am the Director General's representative to Ethiopia for the International Livestock Research Institute, where I also serve as the CGIAR's regional representative for Eastern and Southern Africa. What I want to speak to you in introducing this event today is the role of livestock in nutrition, poverty, alleviation, and livelihoods. We all know that livestock, in terms of animal source foods, they are very nutrient dense. And so, even in small quantities, they can make a difference in poor settings. But for us to be able to make sure we can leverage that benefit, we need to be able to produce these animal source foods in a sustainable manner and within poor settings, which brings me to livelihoods. In many of these settings, livelihoods are also dependent on livestock. In pastoralist settings, it is the dominant livelihood. In crop livestock mixed farming systems, they play an important integrated part of food systems there, where they either provide animal draft power in terms of producing crops, or they complement the incomes from crops, from the products that are received from there. So it's not just nutrition, it's now livelihoods as well. Then comes the poverty alleviation aspect of things. And this comes through multiple avenues. One, in pastoralist settings where it is the predominant livelihood, so that's the main source of income for the people there. They can't have the grains and the cereals unless they sell livestock. They can't address issues of health where costs are related because the income comes from livestock. But further, we also know that nutrition is an important aspect of brain and cognitive development in children. And livestock, I said already, because of the nutrient density, they offer that benefit in terms of nutrition. The Africa cost of hunger studies done by the African Union across multiple African countries have established that malnutrition costs African countries anywhere from 2% of GDP up to 16% of GDP. Africa average is 10%. If you think how much we celebrate when our economies grow 2% or 3%, 5%, imagine 10%. But that's what we lose just by virtue of malnutrition and the nutrition in particular, health costs and the like. So in terms of poverty alleviation, when you limit cognitive and brain development for children, you limit education outcomes, you limit their earning potential in adulthood, you are draining GDP year after year. That is having a negative impact on economic development and poverty. And so I am happy to declare the session open. And also happy that you are addressing a just transition, because a just transition requires that you address this context effectively as you think to look at how sustainable transition becomes not only for Africa, but for other parts of the world with similar effects. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Ziegler, and I am the representative today from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture. We're one of the partners of this event, bringing the um, perspective and voice of the 34 countries of the Western Hemisphere today. Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture is made up of all 34 ministries of agriculture of the Western Hemisphere. We are very happy to be partnering today with Fiona's team at ILRI and the CGIAR, and thank you for inviting us to address this really important issue. We have a pavilion here as well called the Sustainable Agriculture of the Americas Pavilion, and we were here last year as well at COP27. One of the things we noticed this year was the vast number of panel requests to be in our pavilion that had something to do with livestock. So I think it's almost 50% this year of our panels in the Americas are covering the issue of livestock, adaptation, mitigation, transformation, nutrition, circularity, all of these topics. I bring you greetings from our Director General, Dr. Manuel Otero. He is a veterinarian and an Argentine. So you can imagine that one of his special areas of interest in ICA, my organization, and in the Americas is how can we improve and transform the production of livestock to make it as sustainable and as profitable and as circular as possible for a world that is demanding more dairy and more meat and many more products that we use from livestock. One thing I will just mention briefly, just this week, ICA launched a paper looking at cattle farming and climate change in the Americas towards low carbon development models. And in the Americas, of course, we have all forms of production methods from large countries that are extremely developed and including smaller countries and countries that use more of a traditional approach to livestock. All of these approaches are valid and valuable, and ICA serves as a bridge in the Americas to share experiences and knowledge and help transform all production systems to be more productive and sustainable. So I bring regards from our institution. We're happy to have the voice of all of the world here in this panel, Africa, Asia, Latin America. Thank you again for hosting us. Thank you, Fiona. And I turn over now the panel to the moderator, Fiona Flinton of ILRI.
Thanks, Margaret. So to set the context for the panel, we're going to have a 5-minute film. So if we could please run the film now, thank you.
Nutrition and livelihoods. Animal source foods provide crucial nutrients that are not easily obtained from other sources. Meat, leather, wool, and milk make up 40% of agricultural value in high-income countries and 20% in low-income countries. But livestock also contribute 11 to 20% of global greenhouse gases and 30% of anthropogenic methane worldwide, varying across production systems and regions. About 88% of these emissions comes from enteric digestion of ruminants released through belching. The remainder comes from manure. Greenhouse gases, including methane, contribute to global warming and climate change. While today low, middle-income countries and high-income countries produce around the same amount of livestock methane emissions, it is expected that by 2050, 66% of global livestock emissions will be from low, middle-income countries as populations and incomes grow. This means that we must work to ensure that the development of the sector occurs along a low emissions pathway. Countries need to reduce methane from livestock digestion and manure to hit their climate targets and transition to more sustainable and efficient livestock production. Most currently available methane reducing technologies target feed. Technologies include methane inhibitors, taniferous forages, lipid diet supplementation, concentrate feeds, and genetic selection of animals that produce less methane from their food. It's the microbes in ruminant stomachs which produce the methane, and there are ways to alter this. Methane inhibitors that target these microbes can reduce methane emissions by an average of 30% per cow. One of the most promising is Bovaer, scientifically known as 3-nitroxapropanol. Bovaer has been developed by Swiss-Dutch company DSM Firmenich and is now approved for use in more than 50 countries. For systems where livestock mainly feed through grazing pasture and rangelands, the only effective approach is to increase the productivity of the animal through climate-smart livestock practices. This includes improving feed and forage, animal health, pasture, and rangeland management. We can reduce emissions from manure using simple interventions like managing moisture and oxygen levels. Microbes, which don't need oxygen, can convert methane into biogas, which has a double benefit as it can also save use of fossil fuels. What is needed to further develop and scale these technologies? First, we need more testing in different livestock production contexts to take many technologies from early stages to practical implementation at scale. Secondly, we need government policies and incentives, such as subsidies and tax incentives, to reduce the cost of technologies together with regulatory standards. Thirdly, farmers need not only to know about the technologies, but require training on how to use technologies and strategies effectively, taking into consideration social and cultural norms. And fourthly, we need to remove financial and market constraints for producers. We need more private sector investment and public sector incentives. Consumers need the price of animal products with reduced carbon footprints to be kept low. If we are going to successfully reduce livestock emissions, the international community needs to come together. We need to share good practices and innovation. We need policy solutions that encourage the private sector to invest and research to fill gaps in knowledge on livestock and climate. Investing in climate smart livestock practices is the best way to reduce methane emissions in low to middle income countries, whilst also improving livestock health and productivity. By doing so, we not only help farmers adapt to climate change, but we also reduce livestock's carbon footprint.
So, Rajeshri, starting with you, different challenges and solutions to climate mitigation and adaptation were shown in the film. How does this resonate with the situation, the context in India?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you, Fiona, for inviting BIF. And let me tell briefly about BIF. BIF Development Research Foundation is a national level NGO which is working across India, and we are well known for our work in livestock sector. And we are reaching to around 4 million families through our livestock based programs. So yeah, this film is beautifully made. I think highlighting the challenges, context, and also the possible way forward in terms of technologies and research. So the challenges in India typically, and I think it also applies to South Asia, is because first of all it is smallholder led livestock system. So that is the context that we have to understand. Each of the farmer has integrated crop and livestock based farming system that is there, and I think that has implications for also the extension method that we will use. Second thing is, I think India is diverse in terms of agroclimatic zones and also in terms of diversified population of cattle also. So breed variation is there, like almost 50 breeds of cow and 51 breeds of buffaloes are there, and other than that, sheep, goat also. These are all recognized breeds, but apart from that, there are non-descript also. So that is one kind of challenge that we have. Second challenge is scanty resources. And I think climate change is posing more problems for these resources like water, also the fodder and feed, and that is another challenge that we are facing. And third thing is the overall feminization of farming. Also, the women centrality is there. It is when able-bodied men are migrating, it is the woman, farm woman who is taking care of livestock. So I think all these implications are there, and around these challenges, I mean, scientific interventions, innovations, and also emission based pathways are required. So, that I will talk later on, but these are the representative challenges, especially in India.
Thank you. Turning to Meredith, um, as someone from the commercial sector, I mean, what are your views of the film and the steps and challenges that you're facing within your production system, specific production system? Yeah, let's start with.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. So yeah, I manage 3,000 acres of grassland in the United States, and just to frame it for everyone, I manage 200 cattle beneath 1,000 acres of ancient forest. I conserve over 660 native species, and I've participated in a number of different research organizations. I consider our ranch a living laboratory for research and science to take place. And initial data modeling is showing that the way that we are raising livestock on our ranch in a way that's in symbiosis with the landscape shows that every year we do what we do, we're sequestering a net 2,500 tons of CO2 every single year. So that's like every year I'm taking 551 cars off the road. Okay, so I produce 69 million nutrient dense calories. My water cycle is climate resilient and fully functional. I take 550 cars off the road, and I'm preserving the last 20% of grassland that has not been plowed up in the United States. So there's potential here, right? Now, what I'm seeing, and it's something that's very important, is that, you know, a rancher is a shepherd, right? So my whole life, I live outside in this landscape with my animals. So I know the blooming cycles of everything. And I can tell you that I have seen the harsh realities of climate change even on my natural ecosystem, right? So I've seen weather events are either floods or droughts, like we're in the middle of a 3-year drought right now. Um, you know, we've had severe freezing temperatures that just have decimated birds, bugs that exist in the middle of the winter that normally don't. And so, you know, these things I just describe as almost creepy. Now, how I say that livestock gets from point A to point B is to mimic the natural existence of ruminant animals within that ecosystem in which they've co-evolved for millennia, right? So defer to nature instead of man's heavy hand, right? So find that balance in which ruminant animals exist to benefit the landscape, and the landscape benefits those ruminant animals. And that's the balance in which I'm trying to achieve. And I believe that's the way that we have food security, climate resilience, and empower rural farmers as well.
And do you get any assistance from the government for that in terms of subsidies or tax incentives?
Yes, that is a very important question. So I realized after the pilot that said that we took we sequestered a net 2,500 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere, that it would be very lucrative for me to go and sell my meat directly to an urban city such as Dallas. But if I was to do that, it might have been good for me financially. But I have a 9-year-old son, and I realized that I wanted something more impactful than that, right? Uh, the amount of beef that I produce annually is the amount of beef that McDonald's uses globally every 45 minutes. So I'm just a drop in the bucket, right? And so me and a bunch of small nobody ranchers came up with an idea to transform the United States beef industry at scales, right? So here's a bunch of people on the ground, like coming up with something. And we put in for a USDA Climate Smart Commodities grant, and the government awarded us $30 million to execute that. So in the next 5 years, we are going to have solid shareable numbers and hopefully have a great wheel that we have invented that we will share with the rest of the world.
Fantastic. Excellent. Um, Josephat, let's go to Africa. Um, Last year, you attended a pastoralist youth forum with pastoralists from Kenya, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. Can you tell us what the pastoralist youth in East Africa think about climate change, and how pastoralist systems, like, what is your vision for pastoralist systems going forward?
Okay, thank you so much. Before I go on first, I would like to congratulate you, Fiona, for being successful to incept this youth association in East Africa. You have been Jen in leading transformation of pastoral community in East Africa. The youth perception on climate change is very clear in terms of livestock impact on climate. They are aware about the challenge of livestock on climate, the issue of grazing, the issue of deforestation for the grazing land, but also the issue of methane emission. They have actually also been encountering in the areas. And of course, they have started to implement most of sustainable practices. For example, in Tanzania, we have some youth group who are participating right now on rotation grazing in pastoral communities, and they produce pasture and conserve them into hay and silage. So this indicates a promising shift toward eco-conscious practice during this era of fighting against climate change. But also the perception of youth toward climate change on livestock. It is also very clear that erratic weather pattern, but also the prolonged drought and the issue of unpredictable rainfall have been devastating this community. It affects the productivity and production of livestock, and animals suffer from malnutrition and become susceptible against parasitic diseases. For example, in East Africa, we experience East Coast fever, one of a very big challenge, but also trypanosomiasis disease. And also this lead to spread of zoonotic disease, for example, brucellosis, which also affect human who consume this dairy product. So it's very clear for the youth, and also we are taking action to make sure that we are addressing this challenge in pastoral communities. But of course, after inception of AYPI, we set it together to discuss how are we going to drive change in our community. And we agreed that first thing we have to do some initiatives. And one, we are advocating now on the issue of recognition and representation of pastoral community in the various issues. For example, on the issue of policy making process, we have seen now the government is starting recognizing this community during the policy making process, but also representation in various conferences. For example, in Tanzania, we had few months ago the African Food System Summit, which was also this pastoral community got a very big chance to present their views, their perspective toward this climate change. And also, we are advocating the issue of land rights and resources accessibility. There is a very huge bias in terms of resources distribution. The budget from the government is actually based on sedentary agriculture and actually discriminate this community. So we are looking to advocate the government so that to provide equal distribution of financial resources to this community so that they will be able to address the issue of climate change. But also another issue that we are doing, we are promoting now resilience against climate change. As I said, we are promoting the issue of sustainable livestock practice, the issue of rotation grazing, regenerative grazing, but also we are having campaigns in Tanzania for planting agroforestry tree. We are currently planting Lucina leucocephala, one of the agroforestry tree, Sesbanian Sesban, Moringa oleifera, which can be also used to feed animal. So we also encourage the governments to import seed, because recently in Tanzania we don't have any organization which is working to produce pasture seeds. So we are encouraging now the government to import seed from Kenya so that we can be able to produce pasture and support this community to conserve those pasture into hay and silage to be used during drought period. But also the project in water management, we do we are looking for the possibility of getting simple technology to extract groundwater. We have conducted some survey, measure water table in various areas, especially in northern part of our country. Found that is very conducive, and it is possible for we to extract it in the groundwater. But also the possibility for harvesting rainwater is in consideration. So that is what we are doing in a nutshell. But our vision, we really wanted to make sure that by the year 2050, we addressing all this pastoral injustice and foster a future of this pastoral community by integrating modernity with traditional, but also sustainability with innovation, economic prosperity, but also with cultural preservation. This is very important, especially for Maasai community, Sukuma, and Balbaigi community, which are the most of pastoral community in our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephat. So, Bernard, Josephat mentioned livestock health, and it was also mentioned in the film as an important contribution to improving livestock productivity. Can you give us some ideas about how that can happen?
Yeah, thanks. I work with International Livestock Research Institute as a scientist. And looking back to animal health, you realize farmers nowadays go for clinical services. They treat cases when they occur. But in the era of climate change, that will not be efficient. You know, droughts, rainfall really synchronize diseases so that when these diseases occur, they affect many animals at the same time. So it's no longer efficient really to treat cases as they occur. The best approach would be to use preventative services. And many of these diseases, like what you said, East Coast fever and others, have vaccines, which if they are applied, maybe one vaccine at a time or multiple vaccines at the same time, would really prevent many of these diseases. Another thing to consider is these diseases occur at a time when they are least expected. So you are better off really doing preventative measures. As you know, prevention is better than cure, rather than waiting for these diseases to occur. And that in that way, you luckily prevent a lot. But farms exist in an environment, and also farms exist in a society. So there are additional measures which farmers should be doing. One of them is really tapping into information services. And you realize many of the governments really have forecasting systems, surveillance systems, which farmers need to tap in order to get more inputs in terms of information and what to do to prevent diseases. He mentioned about environment, and I think farmers also should really be very keen in terms of conserving their immediate environments, making them much more resilient, because avoiding things like overstocking, which actually makes the environment much more vulnerable to outbreaks or diseases. Disposal, you find people really just disposing manure in ways which really affects, because you're actually contaminating your immediate environment, which will become sources of infection. So there are those small things here and there which farmers can do to prevent recurrence of diseases, including, managing environment, using preventative services, and tapping into information services which are really available for them to um, uh, manage the next case.
Okay. And I mean, heat stress. A lot of people are talking about
Yeah.
the problem of heat stress going forward as one of the impacts of climate change. I mean, what's your opinion of that? What are the trends that you see, and what are the things that you think farmers, livestock keepers, pastoralists should be thinking about and preparing for that going forward?
Yeah, heat stress is one of the, of course, it happens in many places because of increasing temperature. And it has been shown actually in experiments that with heat stress, it reduces the ability of an animal to mount a response to diseases. It reduces our ability to mount an effective immune response to infections. And so I think there are technologies we have been developing in the West, like, creating sheds or even providing places where animals can cool off to manage those environments. But in addition to heat stress, also, with climate change, many of the vector-borne diseases you mentioned will become much more rampant because temperatures really enhance the development rate of those disease-causing agents, the vectors which transmit them, and also in pastoral societies, as you said, because of climate change, there'll be much more movement, localized movement, but also long distance movement. And those movements also tend to disseminate infections here and there. So those are the things which we should actually be thinking in a much more broader perspective in terms of heat stress, disease occurrence, movement, and managing all these things at the same time.
Thank you. So, Gonzalo, let me turn to you. You're coordinator of sustainability and climate change at the Ministry of Agriculture in Uruguay. And what role do you see governments playing in smoothing that transition to more sustainable livestock systems?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Fiona, and thank you, Ika, for the invitation to be part of the panel. Your question is not so easy because, as you see, we are facing a big challenge because we need to balance between the international pressure that we have to reduce emissions and the vulnerability of the farmers that we have now. So I think that we need to balance the both things. And for the policy, it's really a big challenge to put in practice policies and not to leave anyone behind. So we because all we know that we have different type of farmers, those that they are more available to adopt technologies and those that we need more capacity buildings in them and try to bring some incentives to make changes. So that makes a huge challenge for the governments, especially for Uruguay that we have about 63% of family farms. Most of them need to have some, how do you say, some help to make the changes. No? But I think that it's our strength of our research in Uruguay is that we have validate technologies, put it in practice. That they are we call it 3 wins because they increase the productivity, they increase the income of the farmers, and also reduce the intensity of emissions, and also they keep the guarantee that they are keeping the natural resources. So that's our strategy. But we need how to, I mean, after that, we need to think how we need to transfer, how we are going to transfer that technology to the farm, to the farmers, and the adoption of that technology. All people talk about transfer technology and like an easy word, but it's not so easy. So that's why I think that we need more implementation actions in the field. When we talk about implementation actions, is how we are going to make the change of the behavior of some farms to change practices. And it's not so easy for the farms to change the way that they produce from long time ago, from the ancients of the family. So we are developing that we are going to start in 2024, like a challenging project for Uruguay, with the idea to have technical advisor to the farmers. We know this is a very cost implementation, but we think that is the most effective. We have a lot of good results in the country, so we are planning to put in place that policy and working all together. The farmers, the research institute, the extension, the 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 trade institution that we have in the country, all working together with the same view of a sustainable production in the future for Uruguay, and give a signal to the rest of the world that is possible. But we need to have more help, especially in financial, put in practice those policies.
Thank you. So I have some backup questions here, but rather than me going back to those, I'd like to open it up. We've got 10 minutes or so open it up to the floor. So if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask a panelist, I'd ask you to direct it to a particular panelist, and then they can respond.
Thank you. Max Weiss from the Plant-Based Treaty. So I'm really wondering, if we look at the overall global situation in animal farming, 3/4 to more than 90% of the animals, they live on factory farms. But in these spaces, this is never talked about. And I'm going to be very blunt here. I feel like that these massive animal industries, they are kind of hiding behind these initiatives in the global south, and also things like regenerative grazing, which is absolutely not scalable. So when we are talking about a just transition, why are we not talking about these problems? I think this is absolutely essential if we want to have this kind of transition. Yeah, maybe, sorry, Miss Alice, you could answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I really appreciate that question. So the issue with that lies in the fact that the United States beef industry, there is not traceability from point A to point B. So that means that when I go to sell my beef at the sale barn, I do not know where it ends up, where it goes. And when the customer goes to the store or the restaurant, they don't know where it comes from. And so, for example, my grant that I was awarded by the USDA instills traceability from birth, from pasture to plate, basically. And so, what that does basically is share data, like exactly where that calf goes throughout its entire life cycle, and makes it so that no one can hide, right? So, one of the aspects that you could share, for example, is carbon, right? And so consider a calf leaving my ranch as having a carbon bank account or a carbon footprint. And so let's say that's negative 2,500 tons of CO2. Then, based on where that calf goes throughout the beef supply chain, it might fluctuate, right? So if it goes to a factory farm, maybe it decreases that significantly. If it goes to a grass finished farm, it might double that, you know. And with me saying that, I'm not assuming those are the numbers. What I'm saying is let's do the math, right? And let's break it open so that the customer's not guessing where their beef comes from and that I'm not guessing where my beef is going. And so when you empower a customer, the average customer, I'm not talking about somebody that can walk into an expensive Whole Foods and, you know, buy a $35 steak. I'm talking about the average customer at your grocery store being able to choose ecosystem services, right? That's what I want, right? Because the alternative, if we don't make this work, the alternative is that at ranches like mine, right now I could sell my ranch for $30 million to a housing development. 5 miles down the road, I've got a 300 home housing development going in. And so that means my 1,000 acres of ancient forests are tractored down, 660 species of living organisms, several of them endangered and imperiled, just gone. And I'm hanging on to 20% of North American grasslands here. And so I'm thinking that if we try to, you know, not let anyone hide, I think we really have something, and we have something at scale, basically. Thank you for your thoughtful question.
Thank you.
I have one question to Indian panelists. As you have told that there is a big diversity in the population, breed, as well as agroclimatic condition, and how you are taking care of all these aspects. At the same time, what are the different approaches you are taken for reducing the greenhouse gases from your program?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. I will talk about BIOF almost 5 decades of work, and I think we are taking very comprehensive approach. Like we started work in livestock sector basically because it is an important livelihood support system for Indian farmers. So the emission reduction, these are the of late within last 10 years we have started looking at it. And initially the focus was there were so many challenges and technology gaps, so initially our focus was on better genetics, so improved breeding services, also better nutrition and preventive health. So these are the thing. And in the light of climate change now, we have realized we need to work on feed and fodder also. So what we are doing is we are focusing on feed and fodder mapping, including unconventional feed resources. And also we are doing participate. We are part of all India coordinated research trials for forage crops, and where we are trying to introduce newer or improved feed resources which are dual purposes also, because the land is limited and there are continuous demands for that land also. So that is the certain things that we are working on. And I think apart from that, we are also working on dung based pathways for emission reduction, like introduction of improved biogas. But the kind of biogas that we have introduced is not only for clean energy source, but also we are the slurry that is coming out, we are separating it into liquids and solids, and that liquid is mixed with microbial culture to use it as a liquid organic fertilizer, and solids are used as compost cakes. So I think that's a circularity that we are trying to bring in, and there is a life cycle approach to trap methane at every level. So I think it is the end-to-end approach that we are trying to introduce while working with smallholders. So commercial or industrial livestock farming is not very common in India, but these are the practices that we are introducing with farmers. Yeah. Yeah. That also we are working on Haridara, which is a food anti-methanogenic food supplement for emission reduction and reduction of enteric fermentation.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for the thoughtful panel. It's been really enjoyable to listen to. I have a question, if I may, for two of the panelists, Gonzalo and Meredith. We're speaking a lot about kind of metrics and how we measure a just transition. And I'm interested in environmental metrics. And do you think there's a risk that if perhaps at policy and at government level we're very focused on emissions intensity, and we know that there are other metrics out there that are beneficial to nature. Like, how do we sort of reconcile these two things, this product footprint type approach with a more on the ground nature based approach? I hope that was clear. Thank you.
Whilst I'm here, should I take your question?
Hello, everyone. My name is Frankie Kisamo from Tanzania. I had was one question for Mr. Bernard. As you mentioned, some practice which can make as a farmer to reduce the heat stress. What are the specific ways can we do so that we can practice? Just to mention some of them, but I need the which way we can use to reduce the heat stress for there.
Okay, so Meredith, do you want to start?
No, that's a really excellent question. And one of the things that I'd like to hone in on is that you get multiple ecosystem benefits from the same thing, right? So if you think about native grasses versus annuals or planted crops, those native grasses go yards into the soil. So when you think about that, you think about uh, much more drought resilient, much more flood resilient, right? Sequestering a lot of carbon, but then that also has a benefit for your water, your healthy functioning water cycle. Like I like to think of our ranch as a Brita filter, right? So you think about those aspects of it. Those native grasses are home to biodiversity as well. So yeah, it's a stacked benefit when you work within a natural ecosystem. Essentially, you it's really hard for me to picture it as a standalone.
Thank you for the question. I really appreciate that point of view because always we are talking about emissions and that's only the air. And we have several other resources that we need to keep to the future generations. And in Uruguay, all of our policies are pointed in at least 10 different type of indicators. So last year we made a huge work in the whole country trying to measure were more than indicators. There were indicators taking into account emissions, but also the impact over the water, the soil, and the nutrient and all the nutrients flows to the leaching to the waters. Was a, and sorry, and biodiversity. So it was a huge uh, project that the idea was to make it. We made it all together, all the institutions of the country, and the idea was to give some advice to the policies where we need to put in practice policies to reduce the environmental impact of the productions. Because we saw that we have some trade-off, because sometimes those technologies that they reduce emissions cannot be this good for the environment, because we all know that to reduce emission we need to intensify the productions if we want to decrease the emissions. But most of those cases they are coming those systems that they mentioned, that, that the industries of production of meat. So I think that your point is very good, and for all of you we can invite you in the 10th of December. We are going to make a presentation about this work that we develop in Uruguay. It's about 18 indicators around the country, and how after that they use it to implement policies in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Bernard, do you want to respond to the question on heat stress?
Yes, actually, I mentioned one only in terms of infrastructure. You can provide. I've seen in video clips in developed countries where animals are kept in enclosures with some water sprinklers, which can then help in managing temperature. But in our situation, we can even breed for animals which are more adaptable to the environments where we live in terms of, the skin, texture, color, which can then, repel heat or even make it much more comfortable for those breeds of animals to survive in a given environment. Many of the things also we do in terms of production activities, feeding, can be timed to periods of the day when it's conducive for you to do those things. You don't have to be kind of feeding your animals in very tough times of the day when it's really very difficult for those animals to survive. So I think it's a combination of many things in terms of if you can't afford infrastructural modifications, you can breed for animals which can survive in those environments, or you can change your management structure to enable you work in those periods of the day when it will be a bit cooler.
Sure, Josephat, do you want to add something?
Yeah, but also we have to embrace the use of agroecology. The issue of agroecology is one also of a very essential thing to mitigate the issue of stress. For example, in Tanzania, we have 7 agroecology, which is actually providing different species of animals. For example, we have Mpwapwa breed, which can adapt semi-arid and arid areas. But also we have these Frisian breeds and Jersey breeds, which can cope with temperate area. So that is very important for we to recognize the breeds versus agroecology area. Yes.
Thank you. So, if anyone else has any other questions, there'll be a gap between this session and the next session. So I'd ask you to approach the panelists after we finish. And to wrap up, I'd like to invite Joe Puri from the Vice President of Strategy, Knowledge and Development. That's right. At IFAD to just wrap up and give some closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and thank you so much, participants. And thank you very much, Margaret. Such a privilege for me to be here and to be hopefully not wrapping up a very, very rich discussion. But I wanted to reflect very briefly on a couple of things that I heard that also resonated with me, given the work that we are doing at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD, which, as you know, is both a UN agency as well as an international financing institution. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because, as a UN agency, it is our remit and our mandate to leave no one behind. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because it means we focus on the marginalized, the vulnerable, those at risk of falling into poverty, those living in poverty, and especially the small scale producers and those predominantly that are working with livestock. So that's why the overall sector, the subsector of livestock becomes extremely important to us and is also reflected in our overall portfolio. 15% of our overall portfolio, which is approximately, so we've got a current portfolio under implementation of approximately $9 billion. 15% of that has livestock related components in it. Most of our work is, well, all of our work is in developing countries, and most of it is in Africa and Asia, but of course in Latin America and the Caribbean as well. And we know that livestock plays a very important role there. According to the last statistics that we have, more than 1 billion people derive some component of their overall incomes and livelihoods from livestock across the world, which means it becomes really important when we are thinking about poverty and when we are thinking about livelihoods that we've got to address a very important sector that has relatively been ignored to a large extent by the larger community of international development assistance and of the financial sector and of the private sector. In this context, IFAD has also been working on net zero, net zero efforts from within the livestock sector, but also in providing a lot of smallholder farmers and producers that work with livestock with financial access. So work and investments that we are currently designing, but have also been designed previously in Africa and in Asia, really work with small scale producers and livestock managers and herders and pastoralists and rangeland related producers to ensure that we are working with them to think of the best ways to communicate uh, new behavior and new technologies that can help to reduce emissions, that can help them to get financial access. In the overall work that we're doing with respect to financial access, we are also committing ourselves to multi-country and regional investments that, for example, are located in one of the most recent ones that we are also designing with ILRI and many of our other partners are located in Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Kenya. And there, the idea is really to examine exactly some of the key things that the panelists here spoke about, which is how can enteric fermentation really reduce and the extent to which it can reduce methanes, given that methane, methane from livestock is 30% of the overall anthropogenic methane emission that we know globally. So there is a huge opportunity there for us to really take it forward and to also combat climate change. Many of you spoke about the work that we can do with respect to feed management, with respect to animal management, animal husbandry, animal health, and vaccinations, and also pasture management that can help to reduce those methane emissions. I think my last and one clarion call would be for more and better evidence. We know, and many of the panelists here spoke about how livestock does help us to generate, I think it was 35% of the overall protein that we consume globally, and less than 20%, but definitely a very critical number in the overall kilocalories that we all consume. So, what we need is really evidence on what works, what doesn't, for whom, why, how much. And when it doesn't work, why not? And that's something that many of the new technologies, processes that many of the panelists have been talking about, we need far better evidence on so that we can use it and then scale it up. With respect to tracking and tracing, and you spoke very eloquently about that, I think it's really important as we start to think about mitigation and reducing greenhouse gas emissions if we really want to see this be a big player in the global markets overall. So thank you very much, Fiona, Ilri, and to all of you for being here in this afternoon session. And I look forward to further discussions. Thank you again.
You can have one photo